Hello everyone, my name is Bee, or Onyx Nova Cosplay, and welcome to my YouTube channel where I make cosplays, crafts, and other weird crap. And today, I don't know which category he falls into, but I love him very dearly. This is the little gnome from Little Nightmares and Little Nightmares 2, and we have named him Snossage the Sausage. And I love him very dearly. But stick around with me today, and I'm going to show you how I made this little guy. I'm very proud of him. He's held up pretty well. I do want to say... it removes. So I got a little buddy. It's great. I love him. But anyway, stick around with me. I'll show you how I made this little guy. And if you have any questions, leave them down in the comments, because I know that this might not be the exact way that something should be made. And I realize that you might say, I feel like there's a smarter way to do it. And if there is, please comment that down below. I am by no means a professional in any way, shape, or form, especially when it comes to like plushie or pseudo plushies. So like, please comment how you would make it down below if you have a little more experience with this. But enough chit chat, enough rambling. Please let us go to the video. Woo! So the very first thing that I did is to shape the cone the way I wanted it to be, because I wasn't quite sure what size I wanted to go for. Now in the game, they are almost the exact same size of the characters, and I knew I was not going to be carrying around a life-size plushie. I wasn't going to do that to myself. So I figured I would find one that was like a cute size that I could carry around with me, that would also be comfortable and easy to pack, because I knew I was going to have to take it in a 12-hour car ride, and I didn't want to take up unnecessary space trying to fit this gnome in my car. So I made the shape, I flattened it out, which I wish I had flattened it a little bit less, because I ended up kind of leaving a dent on the sides where it was bent. But I flattened it out so I could trim the excess, and then I tossed that excess to the side and cleaned it up a little bit so it would be as perfectly round, perfectly being a vague term, perfectly round as possible on the bottom. I also knew that I would want to add a little bit of a lip or a brim to this, and I know what you're thinking, why would you cut off the excess if you were just going to add some back on? But I wanted it to be in that same round shape, and I'm sure there's some way to fold a rectangular piece of foam to make it into a good sized cone, but I, quite frankly, didn't have the patience to figure that out. That sounds like too much math for me. So what I did was grab some excess pieces of foam, cut them down to size, and then glue them onto the outside of the foam cone that I have created. So I went ahead and added a brim or a ridge around the edge of it, because I knew I was going to be filling it in with other pieces of foam and hot glue and things like that to get the shape that I really wanted. I also would like to say that I was trying to use as much scrap fabric and scrap material as I could for these projects, because I didn't want to spend a lot of money on these, because going to KatsuCon is very expensive, for me at least, because it's very far away, and I wanted to make sure that I had enough money to get there, pay for the room, all that good stuff. And I knew that buying unnecessary things like extra foam would slow me down when I already had the stuff to do it. Also, I went ahead and cut some ridges into the bottom of this and gaps in the bottom of this, because I knew that I wanted it to look a little rugged, a little ragged. I also had to put a little groove in parts of it because it was not folding out the way I wanted it to. It was curving a little too much, so I really wanted to make sure it was a good gap. I used this mannequin head to get the shape that I wanted, because I knew I wanted it to be round, and it kept trying to fold in on me. So I decided that I would just force it to be the shape that I wanted by using the mannequin head. And then I went ahead and filled in the gap between the brim and the main part of it with some hot glue, and added some little hot glue veins, slime, I don't know what it is, but it looked funky and I wanted to add some. So I went ahead and used a hot glue gun and added all that around so I could cover up some of those nasty, nasty little gaps. Next up, while I was thinking about what colors to paint it, I figured I should start on the body. So I have this excess pleather that I got like years ago. I don't even remember where I bought it. I don't remember what it was used for. But I have so much of it that I'm making up reasons to use it. And I figured, why not use it for this little guy? So I went ahead and traced out the generic shapes that I felt would be best suited for his little rotund body. Now, admittedly, I made him a little cuter and a little rounder than I meant to, but I had already committed at that point. There was no backing down. Once the roundness was there, I said, well, I guess he's a cute little round baby this time. And I traced them just with a pencil onto this fabric, and I traced around to match the other side, so they were basically the same shape. And then I cut it out, and I literally hand sewed all of these together. I hand sewed his body and his arms and legs, so it took a bit of time. I did a lot of hand sewing. I also went ahead and labeled them, so that way when I was sewing, I would not pin the wrong ones together. Speaking of pinning them together, though, I used the little clips instead of actual pins, because I don't like the little pins. I think I've talked about that before, but I don't like the little pins. I don't enjoy them. They hurt. They stab me. These little clips, though, a godsend. Love them. So I clipped all the way around and then left a little gap where I was going to stuff the foam into that. So back on the head, I tried to use some of that foam filler to really fill in those gaps a little extra, and that's what I was waiting on to dry while I made the body. I guess I didn't film me putting the foam filler on it, but it was kind of crumbly, so it was kind of messy, and it wasn't worth it. So I went ahead, put the foam in there, and then filled it up as best I could, and then I had to brush off the excess because it was like really piling up. But then once that excess was gone, I coated it in a coat of black paint before adding the more grayish color that it will end up being. I think it's best to, I'm going to loosely call this priming, but I think it's best to prime everything that you paint just for your own sanity. It'll make everything a solid color. Even if you're using the same color foam on everything, it can still help make sure that it actually is the same color and you don't end up with any surprises afterwards. So when it came to actually making the color of this little guy, in game, they're quite, like, if black and white had a sepia filter on it, it's like a light brown but a light gray at the same time. And I was trying my best to try and replicate that as much as I could. So I went ahead, mixed some brown, some white, and some black, and I had to go through it a bit, but I wasn't too worried about using too much because I knew I was going to have to use a lot anyway. So I went ahead, mixed it up. I always mix my paint with the tip of my paintbrush, and I like the end of it, and I know I probably shouldn't. I'm sure there's a better way to do it, but that's literally how I've always done it. And then when I found a color I was pretty happy with, I went ahead and put a coat all over the head of this little gnome guy. I will also say that when it comes to mixing colors, it's all just guesswork, and I know that there's like color theory and things like that, but I don't really study it. I just kind of guess, trial and error, make it work, and go from there. I also made sure to get on the sides of all the hot glue and cover them entirely so there were no gaps by them. Even though I go back and add paint around them later, I wanted to control where the shadows were on this, so I covered it completely in paint so I could go back and add the shadows in myself. I also, if you saw me mix it on my cry cut mat, yes, this is a cry cut mat, I mix all my paints on there, but when I do that, it makes it easier to go back and match a paint. I'll literally just put the new paint that I have to match on top of or next to the same spot and mix it so it all works. Like when I mix it, I can match it and it all works together. So after I did one coat of paint, I went back and I added some more on afterwards in the gaps that I was talking about, making sure I didn't actually miss anything in there. But yeah, no, I've had some people upset that I use my cry cut mat to mix my paints on, and it works the best for me. I don't like using palettes, I don't like wasting things like that, so I just mix it straight in the cry cut mat. I try to use the other side for only cutting, but paint ends up on both sides because I paint more than I cut. So whoops, but it's fine, it's fine. Also, you'll notice that this looks a little bit lighter. I think I had to add a little bit more white to this one, but I also had to go a secondary coat on this because it was showing through with the black coat too much. In hindsight, I probably should have done a white coat of primer, but I really wanted it to be gross, so I figured a black coat would give it that dark edginess I wanted, even though I'm covering it completely. But I'd rather have a black base than a white base for this, so that way in case any black showed through, it would look like it was part of it instead of like some sort of white foam that I obviously missed. Also, this was fun to paint because I kind of felt like a pirate having it as like my hook on my hand. I know it's not a hook, I know it's a cone, but it was still fun. Next comes to actually building what I'm gonna call the skull. So I tried to use this old Craft Bond glue, but it really the hold was not holding, so I have to go back and add some hot glue later. But I glued the lid of this bottle into the center of this, what was a ramen bowl. I glued it down and let it dry, and I knew I was going to flip it and put it inside the cone. Yeah. I set the bottle itself off to the side and painted the skull. I'll call it a skull. I don't feel right calling it that. But I painted the exterior of the skull for the same reason that I painted the foam black when I started, which was in case something happened and it broke, it would look like it was a part of it and not like I just did not finish something. And I feel like some people would be like, well, that's a waste of paint. And I'm like, maybe, but like, if it had broken on the con floor, it would be much easier to hold it together for photos and maybe have a little bit of the black showing through versus a completely white empty ramen bowl showing through on the exterior. So once that was basically good and dry, I knew it was time to remove the label on this bottle. Now what I originally was going to do was build the bottle as the skeleton of the character itself. But what I decided to do was just use the neck of the bottle instead, because it was not going to work with the shape I had been imagining for the character. So I went ahead and washed it out and all that, but I only end up using the neck of it. That being said, I did realize I'm going to need to paint the inside where you might actually see it. I will say though, I did not paint the inside of the cap itself because I wanted to make sure that it would still screw closed and I didn't want to get paint in like the grooves. And next up is the body. So I was trying to paint this so that way when I put it in the skin, I hate using these words. Basically, I used some fabric to make the exterior of this little guy, and I figured I could use the bottle as the interior of this little guy, but the shape I made for the body and the shape of the bottle did not like each other. So this painting part, while still necessary, I could have stopped it around the neck instead of continuing it all the way down the body. But I also just love painting, so really an excuse to paint I'm down for. And once that was all well and good, I knew it was time to glue the skull into the head. Pop that bad boy right on in there, and I went ahead and took my hot glue gun and followed the rim of it around the outside so it would stay in place. And it's a gross little gremlin guy anyway, so I wasn't worried about it. So this is me realizing that the body just ain't gonna work, so I got my X-Acto knife out and decapitated it. Straight up cut the neck off this bottle. And it took me a minute to find the right tool to make it work, but I made it work. It's nasty, it's rough looking, but I made it work. But I actually stole this trick from prop makers and wig makers who do similar things for ponytails and large weapons. So I said, why not take it for myself? And then I flipped the little legs around so I could start filling them with foam and putting it on the body. I realized that these clips are kind of all over the place. When I was making this, I was bouncing between project to project so I wouldn't get bored. Because I had a lot to do and I didn't want to get bored while trying to do it. So now it's time to actually make the body. So I realized that with the material I wanted to use and the shape I wanted to make, the bottle wasn't going to work. And I figured I'll just fill this bad boy with foam so he'll be all nice and comfy. So I flipped some fabrics right side together with wrong sides out, traced the generic shape of a cute little guy, and then cut it out. Well, pinned it and then cut it out. And I only pinned it on one side, so I only had half of it to cut off. And then, you know, back to hand sewing hell. I also realized with the arms and the legs that I made them a little too narrow, so I ended up having to cut off a little bit of the excess, just so that way I could really get the shape that I wanted. I wanted him to be a cute little guy. I also bought all this polyfill that I used for these like years ago. I was still living with my parents at the time, and this giant box of polyfill showed up at my house, and my dad was like, what is this for? And I was like, I was gonna make something, and I didn't realize how big a 5-pound box of polyfill was gonna be. So I still have it almost like, honestly, probably close to a decade later. I probably got in 2017. It's like what, 7 years, 8 years almost that I've had this polyfill. I'm looking for reasons to use it, all right? I'm looking for reasons. And it was a lot of me stuffing it, stuffing the limbs and just sitting around. Thankfully, it didn't take too long. It was kind of therapeutic, I'm not gonna lie. I kind of enjoyed it, but it did take a bit of time. I also watched a lot of YouTube and the original Iron Chef while making these because I had to keep my focus on something. I also feel like the smarter thing to do would have been to sew the arms into the body, like the arms and legs into the body before filling them all, but I didn't do that, so he's a little wonky on the arms and legs. What I would have done is, like, before sewing the body together, I would have put the arms and legs and like filled them and sewed them in between so it looked a little neater. But he's still a cute little guy, so I'm not too mad about it. Also, look up like actual like creators who make like stuffed animals or like little models and things to see what they do, because what they make will be a whole lot more professional looking than what I made. Then I went ahead and put the neck inside this body, and I really had to sew it down because that neck hole did not want to stay, and hot glue did not work on this pleather. Okay, I tried, but hot glue and this pleather did not get along. It did not work. Now, hindsight would have let me know that I was maybe making this neck a little too small, considering the shape of the ramen bowl. I maybe would have realized that even though the ramen bowl was the perfect shape for the body, it was not the perfect shape for the neck. And when I finally put the neck onto the head, he was a little potato-looking guy. Squishy and cute and adorable, but not the size I'm looking for. So I gave up on that for a moment and decided I would attach the limbs just to see what that looked like. But I was really trying to figure out a way to get this neck to not look so potato-y afterwards. He was a cute little guy though. I really enjoy the size of him. So what I'm doing here is sewing the limbs shut so that way I can sew it to the body. But like I said before, I wish I had like not sewed the body fully shut so I could have sewn that into the seam of the body instead of sewing it the way you see me doing now, which is like sewing it to the outside. Now here with the cardboard, I am stealing some cardboard from this box that holds all my junk, which I really need to go through. Oh, thank you, Mustard, for helping me. Hi, baby. Yeah, good job. My actual cat showed up at the same time she showed up on screen for me. But I went ahead and cut off a section of cardboard so that way I could use it for the neck. I also had this little wheel thing, which was like perfect for measuring, but I actually went ahead and set that off to the side. I didn't use that wheel inside the thing. I think I thought about it, but I don't think I actually ended up using it. It's been a minute. I say think because I don't remember exactly how I made it. But then I went ahead and got my X-Acto knives back out and cut that circle. I could have used like scissors or something, but I just hate using scissors on cardboard when I have X-Acto knives. So I went ahead and took that excess cardboard off as best I could, and I will put it to the side. I have a pile of stuff that I need to work through of extra material. Maybe I can make a project that just helps me get rid of all my excess crap. Maybe that's what I'll do. I'll find a reason to use all my extra shit so I can get rid of it. But now that I have this perfect little round circle of cardboard, I'm going to go ahead and glue it in so I can make sure that this neck is the right size. I didn't show it, but I will remove I did remove the cap beforehand so I can continue to use the cap as part of the neck. And like I did originally with the ramen bowl, I went ahead and hot glued on the outside as well to make sure that it wasn't going to fall out on me while I used it. So that way it'll actually sit on his body nicely instead of sitting weird. See, this is me trying to use hot glue on the rim of the neck, only to realize that the faux pleather that I was using did not like hot glue. So that just peeled off as soon as it dried, which was kind of a bummer because I was really hoping for something to hold that together. Oh, and it also burnt the material. So it was really an 0 for 2 on hot glue with that leather, but that's okay. Then I went ahead, popped that cap back on there, and then I went ahead and painted it so I could make it match the exterior. I didn't want some random cardboard showing through. I also really love just showing you guys me mixing paint because I think it's pretty. I love watching people mix paint in like ASMR videos and stuff, so I really just use any opportunity to show you guys me mixing paint. But then I went ahead and painted the interior to make it like a slightly darker color than the outside for like shadow effects. But that way it blended in. I still didn't paint the inside of the cap though because I didn't want to mess up the ability for it to screw shut. Also, if you're wondering why I'm wearing a mask, I had a roommate at the time and I was sick and I did not want to spread the sickness because our house was small. But also I just think that mask is really cute, so. And then I went ahead and painted the body. Now I kind of had to use my finger because I tried to use a paintbrush, but I wish I had found a way to thicken up the paint a little bit, make it more like fabric paint. I didn't have fabric softener, so I would have had to find something else. I had to use my finger because it was the only way that I could get it to stay on the pleather without like rubbing off, because the paintbrush was just like adding too many streaks and the fingers were not adding those streaks. So I was basically finger painting the entire puppet. Plushie? Plushie's what I meant to say. But anyway, here's the body fully painted. I had to go back and touch up some spots because I painted the full thing and then realized I was going to have to sit this little boy down so I could let him dry. Didn't fully think that through, but that's okay. I was just really excited to paint this little guy. I also knew that I was going to do some cell shading to match the outfit that I was wearing. The game itself is not cell shaded, but I figured to get that cartoony look, cell shading was the best thing I could do. But look at that little guy. He's so cute. Next up was to make him his little sausage for Sausage the Sausage. It's great. So in the game, they get these sausages and they eat them, and the character I was cosplaying, Six, is the name of the character, would also eat these sausages with them. So I figured, oh, how cute would it be if I could make a little detachable sausage? And some of these images get a little weird looking, but that's just because it's a sausage and we are all 12-year-olds in our mind, okay? So let's remember, this is like a hot dog, okay? A hot dog, basically, is what I'm making. So I got that crappy pleather back out just so I could get rid of it and trace the shape onto the pleather. And of course, as always, you do 2 of them and then sew them right sides together, so when you flip it, it'll be all nice and dandy. So what I wanted to do here was make it so this sausage was detachable, but I didn't have any Velcro at the time, so I had to use a snap, and the snap is literally falling off as we speak. It barely made it through the day. If I ever go back and update this little guy, I'm going to replace those snaps with Velcro, because I should have done that in the first place, but I didn't have any, and I was trying not to waste money. So, and like I said, I hand sewed a lot of this. You can totally use a machine. I just do not have a working machine right now. I am hand sewing everything purely because my machine does not work. I have one machine, but it's old, and I don't have a bobbin that fits it. And then I have another machine that's a newer model, newer being relative, it's from a few years ago. But it just does not want to work. So hand sewing how it is. But it's okay. I kind of like hand sewing. It's just when I have to do it over and over and over again, like when I'm con crunching, I'm like, wow, wish I had a machine, because instead of this taking like 2 hours, it could have taken like 2 minutes. But you know what? That's fine. One day I'm going to save up and get a sewing machine, but I'm not too worried about it at the moment because I'm able to get everything done with hand sewing. But if I ever compete, I'm going to really want to get a machine just for that neatness. And again, like I did before with the limbs, I left a little gap where I knew I was going to go back and put the fluff in and just sewed around the exterior of it all the way around, excluding that gap. So that way I could flip it and then put the polyfill in there and have it all done. They do make turning tools for sewing, but for me, this little sculpting tool actually has done wonders. Once it was all flipped around, it was time to start stuffing. I will say polyfill is not that expensive. I don't know if the prices have gone up in the last few years since I bought that 5-pound box years ago, but I don't remember it being super expensive. However, I will say I also wish I had not bought a 5-pound box. Now you do need probably more than you think you will for most things, because I definitely underestimated how much I would need for the limbs, the body, and the sausage, but I made it work. I figured it out, but I had the box off to my side so I could just like not have to measure it out, and I could just fill it up as needed. But once it was done and it was all nice, I went ahead and sewed off the end and then tried to hide the last stitch inside of it as best I could, so that way you couldn't actually see the knot on the end. I'm sure there's some sort of term for that, but basically with the final stitch that you make, you tuck the needle under the previous stitch and make sure that the knot ends up underneath the fabric, so that way when you cut it, you don't actually see you don't see where the knot would be because you don't have it on the outside. It's hidden underneath inside the sausage itself. This case of sausage, whatever fabric you're using, but in this case it's hidden inside of it. I'm sure there's a term for that, but I don't know what it's called. But then once I tied that off and cut the excess, I went ahead and planned the painting for it. So the paint colors I grabbed were very like cooked hot dog based. Now I don't know if they were actually cooked in the game, but I was like, it's the only way it's gonna read well. So I started mixing some paints. I got some blacks, some browns, and then some oranges and reds, and a little bit of yellow, so that way I can really make this work. So side note, that was me sealing the seams on the hot dog, so it wasn't going to break as much because it was covered in paint. But I have a lot of paints, so I try to work through them before I buy any more, and so that's why I usually end up mixing a lot of paints, is because I usually have close to the color I need with the paints I already have. I did go ahead and throw a little bit of gold in there, trying to give it some shine. It didn't really work the way I wanted it to, but I like the color in the end. So I went ahead and painted it, and I still don't know why I tried to use a brush. It's not like I didn't learn from the entire body of the gnome that this fabric does not work well with brush strokes, but you know what? It's fine. So I went ahead, used my finger to finger paint this, and then sealed the seams of it with paint. And then I left it on top of my paint jar to dry. And I was trying to speed through this, and I should have let it dry more. I was trying to get some sort of like charcoal-y look on the bottom. It ended up just being a mess, and I honestly should have just waited until it was dry and added it later. Because I thought if I had like done it while the main part of it was still wet, then I could give it some sort of like ombre look. So I was like, you know, it was really charcoal on one side. You can really see where like it was starting to burn up the sides, but it just kind of looked messy. It honestly just looked a little messy. But anyway, here are my glamour shots of this little guy. I hope you enjoyed watching me make him. I love this little man. His name is Snossage the Sausage, and he owns my heart. I love him dearly. I did not film me painting the shadows on his body, and I realized that now that I filmed all of everything else but that. But it was basically just me going in with a small paintbrush and filling in the little nooks and crannies. Thank you all so very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please leave a like down below. Leave a comment on if you will make your own little friend and what you would name him. He deserves a name. And subscribe if you'd like to see more of the weird stuff that I make here. But thank you so very much for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye! Yeah. So I just got a little buddy. Oh my god, it hit me in the head. Alright, oh don't fall. We should hold him like a child and rock him down. Okay.